Now that we understand what risk sharing is, what are the 8 principles of risk sharing, let's take a look at risk sharing framework, which provides a structured approach to implement risk sharing in practice. This framework is designed to help organizations to move away from isolated risk management to a collective responsibility that ensures the risks are equitably distributed across stakeholders in the delivery chain. The framework is consisting of 7 interconnected steps. Each one of those steps focus into a key aspect of risk sharing. These steps ensures that risks are properly identified, assessed, allocated, mitigated, monitored, and continuously improved to enhance the humanitarian response. It's not a one-time process. It is an iterative process. We can say it is a cycle of collaboration, adaptation, and learning. Next, we will go through each step. We will see which principles are connected with each of those steps, what are the objectives, and usually what is the output of each of those 7 steps. Now, let's move to the first step. The first step is delivery chain stakeholder representation and equity in dialogue. From the name of the step, we can see what we are going to do within this step. First thing we are going to do is map the different stakeholders or organizations in the delivery chain. The second thing we will try to do is we are going to try to engage them within the risk sharing process by asking them to have at least 2 representatives. Those 2 representatives, usually one technical and the other one from senior management, to streamline the decision-making process in the risk sharing workshops and the risk sharing process that we are trying to do. The last thing we are trying to do in this step to define a convener. A convener is someone who can initiate the dialogue, who can get everyone together, and usually this is built within the structure of the delivery chain. Sometimes the back donor, sometimes it's the consortium lead. Doesn't mean that you are a convener that you will be responsible for facilitating this. You can get an independent facilitator to facilitate the risk sharing process during the project. Here it's very important to ensure that we try to get a fair representation of the different stakeholders. Sometimes it's quite difficult to do that because of the number and of the organizations within the delivery chain. However, we can do a balanced approach between the back donor, international NGOs, and national NGOs to ensure that there is the power balance is there, and to ensure that the essence of risk sharing is not missed from the beginning, from the first step. So what we are going to come up with, we're simply going to come up with a document with a stakeholder list representing each of them, documenting the approach, and finally identifying the convener of the facilitator of the risk sharing process. So let's move to the second step. Holistic risk identification. In this step, from the name of it, we will try to do an identification of those risks that are usually, I prefer myself to do it in silos, like every organization looks at their own list of risks in their risk registers and identify which of those risks are the ones that we are going to share with the facilitator or the convener, and we would request to apply the different risk sharing solutions to such risks. Here, we have to ensure that not any risk to be shared, and we have discussed what kind of risks to be shared. Here, where this principle comes into practice. Here, we simply will share the risk that has an impact onto multiple stakeholders within the delivery chain and impacts as well our ability to deliver aid effectively. So these two conditions have to be there, impacting more than one stakeholder, and the second thing, impacting our ability to deliver aid effectively. Secondly, we'll need to highlight the critical elements of each risk, such as severity, likelihood, and delivery chain impact. So we'll not just make the risk blunt, no, we have to highlight and emphasis into the important aspect of this risk. So it is easier to consider as a risk-sharing opportunity. What we come up with this risk? We simply come up with a compiled risk register made of partners' identified risks that are systematic and impacting the delivery. Very simple list of risks from different partners compiled together into a risk register where each partner believes that these risks have these two conditions that impact the delivery or the assistance we are trying to deliver. Now, let's move to step 3. Risk response strategy assessment. So, in this step, we will simply assess how the identified risks are currently being managed and whether those responses we received from the previous step, from those list of risks, compiled list of risks from different organizations, are being managed in a fair, effective, and created unintended consequences. What do we mean unintended consequences? We mean that those risks have not been pushed down the delivery chain, has not created some kind of a risk transfer to other organizations. So that's what we are going to do: assess those kind of risks. From one side, we'll see the good practices, and we'll see the bad practices that need to be enhanced, that created for us some kind of a risk transfer. What we will come up with here, we'll simply come up with a list of risk responses that has been assessed and categorized by type. Are they good risk practices or bad risk practices that need to be avoided? Also, we'll assess those risk and categorize those risk responses into two other categories, which are preventive measures or reactive measures. It's very important to do that because we would like to have the balance between the preventive measures that will help us to avoid the risks or reactive measures that will help us to mitigate the consequences if the risks materialized. To the next step, which is identification of risk sharing opportunities. Simply here, what we are going to do, we are going to identify which opportunities are good to be included and discussed and to be shared. Here, we will do the following: identify where and how risk-sharing solutions can be applied. The good practices, how can we apply them? The bad practices, how can we either avoid them or change them? Recognize best practices that has been already done the previous step, but here to expand their application for other risks. We have decided that this is a good practice. That's the time where we are going to really benefit from that, not just for that risk, but also for other risks. Target risk response strategies that has been unequitable or have created risk transfer elsewhere for improvement. This is where we are going to benefit from the bad risk practices, that we are going to take them and try to change them. I believe this step shall be preferably done by the facilitator or the convener, because in the next step we will share it with others. So here the convener will take notice of these good practices, of those bad practices, trying to avoid those, try to see what list of risks are identified as a good risk sharing opportunities, as well as taking notice of the different risk appetite for the different organizations in the delivery chain, to make sure it aligns with their different risk appetites. It will be easier then to convince them with the new best practices we are trying to apply in different identified risks. Also, we have to take notice here that sometimes we decide to to take no action in some of the risks. If we selected to take no action, this is actually an action has to be documented and has to be discussed. So this is step 4. We have now identified the different stakeholders, the convener, the facilitator. We have identified the risk sharing opportunities. We have identified the good and bad practices. Now we have tried to expand the good practices. We have tried to change the bad practices, and as well as try to make sure that it's aligning with the different risk appetites. So here we'll come up with a list of prioritized, feasible risk sharing opportunities. Are we going to apply them yet? Not yet. We are still having one more step to do before applying those responses. This step is called action planning for risk sharing. So we'll take this prioritized list with the good practices and what we believe that is the best solution that we've got on mitigation measures for the different risks identified as a good opportunities, and we'll discuss them with the different stakeholders. We will not expect here that if the solution or the mitigation measures for the different risk sharing opportunities aligning with the different risk appetites, that means that different organizations will be happy to accept. Some organization might refuse, even though it is within their risk appetite, and this decision has to be respected. Also here we'll assign the different actions to different organizations based on the agreed risk sharing practices. We have as well as to get the consent for the different risk sharing practices here. In this step, it's very important to recognize that some internal policies or risk processes for some of the organizations might hinder the risk sharing process. And organizations must be coming with an open mind, understanding this, that some of those policies might be challenged, but it doesn't mean that they have to overcome their own policies. But it's a good chance to trigger such discussions because at the moment, I'm sure many of the organizations doesn't have risk sharing within their policies, within their DNA. So you would expect that some of their policies hinder this process. Some of these policies might be actually rejecting some of the risk sharing opportunities, even if it fails within their risk appetite. So what we'll come up with here, we'll come up with a documented and agreed upon risk sharing action plan. So let's wrap up everything we had until now. We had the facilitator, we had the different stakeholders, organization, and the representatives. We got a list from different organizations that believe this is a good, this is a risk and represent a good chance to be shared with other organizations. This risk has to fulfill 2 requirements. The first one, it impacts more than one stakeholder in the delivery chain. The second one, impacting the communities or the delivery or the service we are trying to deliver to the targeted communities. Then we have categorized those mitigation measures for those suggested risks to 2 sorts of categories. One of them, either they are good or bad practices. The second one is simply preventive or reactive measures. Then we have tried to expand the good practices and change the practices that had been identified that might cause risk transference. After that, we came up with a good list of risks that we shared and to be agreed within the different organizations. We'll document this, we'll document our decisions, we'll agree at different actors' position, and finally now we will move forward to implement risk sharing in actions. As you can see here, we put an agreed risk sharing action into practice. If the risk trigger takes place, the mitigation measures immediately to be activated by the different organizations in the delivery chain. Here we'll ensure the readiness to implement both the preventions and reactive measures, depending on the nature and the status of the risk. If the risk has not taken place yet and the trigger the trigger of the risk has been activated, we'll do preventive measures. If the risk is materialized, we'll do the reactive measures. We will always try, and this is normal, to find the quick fixes to help us address immediate challenges. But it's very important that we do not lose sight of strategic solutions agreed for sustainable risk management. This is normal that we do it, and we already explained that in the principles. The final thing, and I prefer to move myself, yes, to here, to monitor monitor how implementation is progressing and adjust as needed. This is a life process, so you wouldn't expect the risks and surrounding dynamics in the environment is the same. So you have to be agile, and you have to keep monitoring those different situations, and to make sure that your responses are always aligned with the latest changes in the surroundings. Usually, you finalize here and you come up with an implementation tracker. Update the implementation tracker showing who did what and what worked and what didn't work. Why we have to implement this? Because in the final step, learning and adapting, what we will do will simply reflect on the action, reflect on how the risk sharing process worked. We'll try to capture what was learned, identify how it can be improved in the future cycles. So what we will do here, we'll evaluate the effectiveness of the risk sharing actions taken in the previous step. We'll reflect on whether the process improved the ability to support affected people, because this is the main target of risk sharing. If we are not really enhanced our ability to support affected people, then we have to review that what we have done and what went wrong. Then we have to assess if risk sharing actions are properly supported across the value chain. Yes, they accepted at the beginning, but do all the different stakeholders kept their commitment to apply this risk sharing practices and agreed solutions to the end or not? If there is any kind of no here, we have to know why. Identify lessons learned and document them for future improvement. This is usually happening, not just in risk sharing, actually in the project in every different aspect. And it's very important to ensure that some of those lessons learned to be reflected into our policies to ensure they are properly supporting risk sharing practices. Finally, ensure that learning capture beyond individual projects, influencing wider policies and frameworks. It's very good practice to come up with a collective documents and telling not just the community, the wider community around your project or within the country you're providing your assistance in, but actually the wider community, how this experience or how this process went, what was the benefits, what you would prefer to replicate, and what you see that need to be changed. So this is an ongoing iterative process, and we always learn from each other. So these are the 7 steps. I think we have covered them really quickly in one video, and there is a lot to digest here. But if you see the need, just go over the video again, and you will get a good grasp of the risk sharing framework and how it could be applied for your own projects. So I'll see you in the next videos. We'll discuss a couple of scenarios where risk sharing really benefited some organizations in real scenarios. Thank you, and see you in the next video.